My name is Lorraine Howe. I'm a researcher with the Centre for Research on Governance and Development, and my colleague Carlos Shengo is also from the same centre. I'm going to speak a little bit this morning about some of the research we've been doing as part of the CESET project, and this is in relation to Mozambique's new off-grid energy regulation. So it has been a good opportunity for us, whilst we're undertaking our project, to actually see a live example of policy development, and we wanted to look at the opportunities and challenges that this may present for the uptake of community energy projects. So as most of you know, in December last year, a decree was passed that actually approved the off-grid regulation. So we wanted to take this opportunity to really not only take part in influencing that policy, so actually some of us in the project took part in the consultation process that to help shape the content of the regulation, but we also wanted to observe that the process tracking actually how the regulation may help shape the uptake of off-grid energy in Mozambique, which is an important part of the learning component of our project. So our project is not only learning around the three countries that we're focusing on, Malawi, Mozambique and Ethiopia. So it's not only to help enrich our project, but also so that our learning can helpfully go back into policy development here in Mozambique as the off-grid energy sector is developing. So for those of you that were at the BRILHO conference last week, you may have heard more from the government's perspective in terms of they presented the new regulation. So I'm hoping that this presentation may be complementary because we have undertaken some key informant interviews with stakeholders working across the off-grid sector here. So some of the private energy operators that are working here, as well as multilateral and bilateral donors that are funding and supporting the development of the off-grid sector here, and some of the projects that the donors are financing to help accelerate that. So I'm hoping we will bring the perspectives of their views in this presentation today. So the interviews were conducted in August this year, and it was structured around two pillars. So firstly, around what their perspectives were of the content of the regulation in terms of what opportunities they thought it would bring for change, any challenges that the regulation presented, and then specifically how it may facilitate the uptake of community energy. And then secondly, it was around the process. So to actually get feedback from the stakeholders, how was the consultation process, if they participated in it, and then looking forward, what are the opportunities for monitoring how this regulation is going to be implemented going forward. So in terms of what opportunities this regulation may bring, I mean, there was an overwhelming sense that this is a real milestone piece for the energy sector here. It basically sets the rules for the game for how people can bring in investment, and it really is the sort of bedrock for taking forward the uptake of energy services and energy access in off-grid areas. There was an acknowledgement that the regulation is not perfect, but then very few regulations are perfect. But overall, the sense is that it's better to have something in place than to have nothing. And particularly, this has increased investor confidence. So there is a big expectation that having this piece of legislation in place is going to accelerate financing, not only from private sector sources, but also from overseas development assistance. And particularly that it will help develop the market to become more competitive, especially for green mini-grids. So the regulation covers all types of energy provision in the off-grid space. So it could also include some solar home systems or other energy solutions like clean cooking stoves, for example. But the operators, particularly that are working on those systems, didn't really see this regulation was going to change their mode of operandus that much. But certainly those that are working in the mini-grid space, this was a very welcome piece of regulation. It also provided increased confidence in the government. So many spoke about the role of ARENE and that they were very open, and there was a lot of confidence in them as a regulator in terms of how things may move forward in regulating the off-grid space. And that this could also be the starting point for clarifying some of the roles and responsibilities of public institutions. And I will come to this on the next slide when we talk about the challenges. So I will speak about that a bit more, but hopefully having this regulation in place will be the starting point to help get better clarity around that, and that it could provide the pathway for government-backed incentives to help accelerate financing. So in terms of the challenges, I mean, obviously the key piece is that at the moment, the regulation is untested. So in theory, it provides the groundwork, but there is a huge amount of accessory regulatory instruments. So those who were at the BRILHO conference last week, I think there's 27 instruments that are in development that are ranging from the concession regulations, providing the sort of technical and safety standards, also the regulation for how off-grid projects may be interconnected to the grid. So there is a huge amount of accessory legislation, most of which is in some form of either development, some of which are more advanced than others. But until those pieces are actually approved and operational, it's very difficult for this regulation to actually be making a real difference in the off-grid sector. So there's still uncertainty in the sector. And the areas of ambiguity in the regulation are really related to these areas that the accessory regulatory instruments will have to unpack. So one of the key things is the roles and responsibilities of some of the key public institutions is not addressed. So EDM has the responsibility for the rollout of the National Electrification Strategy, but you also have FNI that is taking responsibility for off-grid projects. And there is, at the moment, there is a grey area as to how those two institutions, for example, fit together, and that sort of lack of transparency, I think, provides a bit of uncertainty as to who's going to take the lead on certain aspects. A key point that came up across all stakeholders was related to import duties and taxes, and this is in particularly in relation to the tariffs that can be charged for off-grid energy services. So, for example, one of the stakeholders spoke about 45% of their costs are purely paying import taxes and duties on all of the equipment that they need to import. And that obviously means that cost has to get passed on to the consumer. Interestingly, partway through doing the interviews, there was an announcement from the government. The president announced a range of measures, a stimulus package for stimulating the economy, and one of which was actually giving an exemption on VAT for the import of materials for electrification projects specifically aimed at boosting renewable energy projects. So that has been a welcome sign, but there hasn't actually been the details around that. And is this just going to cover solar panels, for example, or a lot of systems, they have a lot of other accessory components, and if it's a solar home system that might perhaps support televisions or other types of equipment that is specific to that system, is this VAT exemption going to cover all of the equipment, or is it just covering parts of it? And that is still not known. Just to go quickly onto specifically on community energy potential, it's not really mentioned. It's not mentioned at all in the regulation, apart from the fact that it's. I have 2 minutes. I'm just going to speed up. But the financial aspects, obviously, that make it very. They don't make it very cost effective for the particularly small scale community energy projects to pursue, and there is a risk that. The returns for energy operators in this area are very low, and many of them are financially very on a knife edge at the moment, partly because they're still emerging from sort of shocks related to COVID and inflation costs. So they need to have that kind of security financially to be able to operate, and the returns are quite difficult for them to make many off-grid projects viable. I will just close just to say that in terms of the consultation process, it was received as being very positive. There were definitely opportunities for people to make comments on the regulation. Many comments were taken on board, and there was a very positive feeling around how ARENE had handled that process, but their institutional capacity, they're a very new and emerging organisation, so their ability to be able to take this forward successfully, I think, is something that remains to be seen. Yeah.